There is a child who learned very early that love was not guaranteed, so they watched. They watched the room before they entered it. They watched faces searching for signs of what kind of day it was going to be, not because they were curious, because they were careful. This is what people-pleasing actually looks like from the inside. Not a habit, not a personality flaw, a survival skill. And you are still running that program right now, without even knowing it. Imagine a child at a dinner table, not eating, just watching their parents' face, trying to figure out if the silence in the room was safe or if it was the kind of silence that needed to be managed. That child learned something very quickly, that making themselves small, making themselves agreeable, helpful, easy, kept things calm. They called it kindness, but it was something else. Because from the inside, it did not feel like a choice. It felt like breathing. They grew up, but the watching never stopped. The reading of rooms, the monitoring of moods, the editing of words before they leave your mouth. And the reason why has nothing to do with being too nice or too sensitive. It goes back to a moment so small you probably don't even remember it. Here is what this actually looks like, not in theory, in your life, right now. You apologize before you have even done anything wrong. Someone walks into the room looking slightly off and your stomach tightens before a single word is spoken. Not because you did something, because their mood somehow became your problem. You rehearse conversations before they happen. In the shower, at 2 a.m. on the drive somewhere. Editing yourself, removing the parts that might make someone uncomfortable. And then the conversation happens and you say a version of yourself, not the real one. Imagine someone standing at a door, hand raised to knock, and then quietly lowering it again, deciding it was not worth the trouble. That is not shyness. That is a person who learned that their needs created problems. And here's something worth sitting with. You do not do this because you are weak. You do this because at some point it worked. It kept things calm. It kept people close. It kept you safe. That child was not broken. They were paying attention. They were doing the only thing that made sense in the world they were given. That child was you. A simple no feels dangerous, not uncomfortable. Dangerous, so you dress it up. I would love to, but maybe another time. I just have a lot going on. Because a no with no explanation feels like an open door for someone to leave. You feel more comfortable giving than receiving. Someone does something kind, and before you can even feel it, you are already thinking about how to return it. Because receiving without giving feels like you have not yet earned your place in that moment. You struggle to ask for what you need. Not because you don't know what you need, because asking feels like too much to ask. You make yourself smaller in groups. You laugh at the right times. You agree more than you disagree. You monitor the room like your comfort depends on it, because once it did. And the next one, this is the one that looks exactly like love. And it is not. Stay with this. Nobody explained this part to you. And that matters. This is not who you are. This is what you learned love required. Psychologists call it the fawn response. It simply means when the world felt unsafe, you did not fight. You did not run. You became easier to love. Some children fight. Some children freeze. Some children disappear. And some children become whatever the room needs. They make themselves useful. They make themselves pleasant. They make themselves impossible to be angry at. That response was brilliant. It read the environment perfectly. It kept them close to the people they needed. But it did not turn off when the danger passed. It followed them into every relationship, every friendship, every workplace, every moment someone looked even slightly displeased. Imagine a smoke alarm that never stops going off, even when there is no smoke, even when the house is safe, even when everything is fine. And you have been living with that alarm so long you stopped hearing it. You just called it your personality. The exhaustion you feel after being around people, the relief of being alone, the sense that you performed your way through the day, that is not introversion. That is not anxiety. That is the cost of running a survival response in a world that is no longer asking you to survive. It goes back to a moment maybe you were 6, maybe younger, when you reached out and what came back was not enough, so you learned to need less, and you have been needing less ever since. This is not just something you feel. It has a shape. Dr. John Bowlby, a British psychiatrist who spent his life studying how children attach to the people they need most, found something quiet and important. When a child's emotional needs go consistently unmet, they do not simply feel unloved. They reorganize themselves around that absence. They build an identity around being needed, around being easy, because easy felt safe. You probably know exactly what that feels like, not as a concept, as a Tuesday. Imagine someone sitting in a meeting room, watching, not the presentation, the faces, reading every shift, every silence that lasts a second too long, not because they are paranoid, because their nervous system was trained to do this long before they ever sat in that room. It is exhausting in a way that sleep does not fix, because it never turns off. It just waits for the next room, the next face, the next silence that needs managing. Here's the part that changes everything. The child who learned to people please was not weak. They were not too sensitive. They were reading their environment perfectly. Every mood monitored, every silence managed, every need shrunk down to something acceptable. That is not a flaw. That is intelligence. That is... Imagine a small plant growing toward the only window in a dark room. It did not choose the direction. It grew toward the only light available. That was you, growing toward whatever warmth existed, bending yourself into whatever shape felt most likely to be loved. You were allowed to take up space. Your needs were not too much. You did not have to earn the right to be loved as you actually were. You never did. And carrying this alone for this long, that has a weight to it, a real one. And if any of this has been sitting heavy, talking to someone you trust or a professional can make more difference than you might expect, not because something is wrong with you, but because you have been carrying this for a very long time. The people-pleasing did not make you less. It made you someone who found a way in a world that did not make it easy, that is worth sitting with quietly. Here is where this lands. You were not born like this. You were not made this way. You were taught this way by a world that was too small to hold everything you were, a dinner that went silent, a door that stayed closed, a moment you needed something and learned not to need it. You called it yourself. Unlearning it does not mean becoming someone different. It means learning that your needs were always allowed to exist. The version of you that wanted things, that needed things, that took up space without apologizing was never the problem. They were just never given permission. Imagine someone opening a window in a room that has been closed for years, not throwing the walls down, not rebuilding everything, just letting some air in, slow, quiet, real. And if this reached something in you, there is more below, not answers, just more conversations like this one, more of feeling a little less alone in something you have carried quietly for far too long, because you did not find this by accident. Something in you was ready to hear it. And the child who learned to make themselves easy deserves someone who made it easy to be exactly who they were. And maybe that person can start to be you. If you go back now to the very first words, you will hear something different. Not a list of things that are wrong with you, but the moment someone finally saw what you have been carrying and did not look away.